Well, good morning. My name is Mette Bjørnholt Karapetian, and I have the great pleasure of interviewing Dr. Larry Rossen, who's the professor emeritus and past chair of the psychology department at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. Dr. Rossen, who is with me, he is a renowned research psychologist. He's also a computer educator. He is a keynote speaker. He writes for Psychology Today, and he is recognized foremost as an international expert in psychology of technology. So Dr. Rossen, he's been at the forefront of this very interesting topic for many, many years. And he has written especially about technology and anxiety. He has written very many interesting books. I hope you'll take some of this and take the opportunity. I Disorder is one of my favorites. The Distracted Mind, Rewired. And it talks really about ancient brains, if you will, in a high-tech world, and talks about how we're rewiring our kids, whether that be the Gen X's, the millennials, the next generation Alpha, with the intense immersion in technology that we see today. So I have asked Dr. Rossen if he would give us a perspective of how he sees the future of teaching and learning, as we consider, of course, both the
Your voice disappeared for that moment.
Oh, did it? Oh,
yes.
Can you hear me now, or no, you can't hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. I'm sorry. I thought I disappeared.
might have been me, actually, at this point. Never can tell with technology.
That is true. Dr. Rossen, thank you so much for being with me. Many people promote, as we know, they promote technology, or they promote online education as an optimal, if you will, as an optimal way of teaching these days. And I'm just wondering, when we talk about economies of scale and sustainability, ease of equity, access, and so forth, but in your opinion, have we done ourselves a disfavor wanting to move everything or more things online? Even if above sounds reasonable, do we lose the personal touch and the connections with the students when we move things online?
Well, in my mind, there are several things that happen, but I'll start with a story. I taught at Cal State Dominguez Hills for 45 years. Excuse me. And at the very end of my career, we entered the pandemic era, and I was pushed to teach online. And the first time I did it, I was set up in a studio. I had a class of 400, so I was set up in a small studio. We recorded it. The students were supposed to watch the lectures and take exams and do assignments that I gave them, things like that. And in general, it seemed okay. But I really didn't realize until the second time that I ran through it what I missed. Because yes, the class was broadcast live and you could watch it live, yeah. But out of 400 students in the class, we had 8 to 10 watching it live, and everybody else taping it, or watching the video version of it, which was fine, I think, in the beginning in my mind. I had this feeling like, well, at least they're getting the material. One of the assignments that I gave them to do was to find another person to watch my lecture. I wanted to have somebody stand in the background and note when they got distracted, because I was studying distraction at the point. I wanted to know when they got distracted, what distracted them. And one of the things that just blew my mind was that hardly anyone watched it at anything like 1.0 speed. Everybody jacked up the speed on YouTube to 1.5 to 2.0. And I thought, well, that's an economy of time, I guess, for them, because my lecture, which would have been 75 minutes, probably cut down to 30 for many of them. But what did they get from it? And I started noticing, first of all, that, I gave the same kinds of exams year after year. And I noticed, oh, you're going to hear my dog growl now because my dog sees somebody outside and thinks it's his territory. Sully, stop. Anyway, I just felt like that there was just no way that they could get it by watching it so quickly. And so part of what I looked at was how they responded to some of the work and some of the test questions. My test questions were always very different. I used to tell the students that on an exam, about a third of the questions were barf questions that they should just have known. They just should have heard. And they got fewer of those because they weren't even picking up the terms. But the others were thinking questions. And on the thinking questions, so I would set up a scenario and ask them which theory would best predict this, or what would such and such a theory predict. And they weren't doing well on those either. And so as I looked, I think my last 3 years of actually teaching were all online. And in my mind, it kept getting worse and worse. Less attention, more distraction. And that was what was also interesting when I had people as they watched me lecture on YouTube, they were often distracted, very distracted. What distracted them? They always had their phones nearby. If they weren't even watching it on their phone, sometimes they were just watching it on their phone, like I'm talking to you on my phone now. They were always distracted no matter what they were doing, whether it was their phone, a tablet, even going and getting a sandwich, doing something. They would leave the video running, turn the sound up, and go make a sandwich. I started to think that the idea of online education sounded great. In concept, it sounded great. And gee, as a professor, it sounded really good to me because I could lecture and then they could watch it whenever they wanted. They didn't have to go to class. And in general, students don't like to go to class these days. They would prefer to do it elsewhere. At least that was my experience. And so I was offering them a quality lecture. The lecture didn't change from what I would have lectured if I had seen them live, but it just, for some reason, it didn't work. And when I talked to some of the students we always recruited students from our classes into our labs to work with us. And when I talked to some of the students, some of the A students, what they said is that they didn't really like the online education. And the reason they didn't like it is because of the contact. They felt like that watching me lecture on YouTube, they missed a lot of the nuance. They missed a lot of the action, I guess I could say, a lot of what went on, because I had to sit at a desk and talk. Yeah. And when I lecture, I wander all over the place. And part of it is just me, but also part of it is to get their eyes moving towards me as a way of sort of putting that punch in there when there's a point I really want to make, and I know their eyes have been following me walking across the stage. Yeah. So I decided that there were a couple of things that went on, and one was that you really have to be live in order to get all the nuance and all of the non-verbalness of it. And it's not just a lecture. It's not just somebody's voice. It's not just my slides. It's the lecture plus whatever goes on top of it. And after a while, I got kind of disenchanted. I mean, I would be so excited when I taught face-to-face, which I did for 45 years. After class, the students would come up and ask questions. And they'd often form this line, which was cute on the stage. They'd form this line on the stage and then off the stage because they had a question they wanted answered. And so I would stay 10, 15, 20 minutes and answer questions. Well, I didn't have to stay 10, 15, 20 minutes anymore because there weren't any questions. Every once in a while, somebody live would ask a question, which they could do. But it was rare, and it was almost always the same person.
But do you find, Dr. Rossen, that this is equally true whether you're doing, because you made a good point, if you say you do a lab, and we had one student in class that says, well, we lose it. It's not the same to hold a scalpel or to do something when you have a lab, to do that online. But I'm fine doing online lectures if it's substituting the big lecture hall lessons that we have when we have 200 people sitting in class. Do you think, does that make a difference? And how do we ensure the quality is then maintained when we do these online lectures if we can't have all the lecture plus added values?
I think you're seeing the 200 student lecture hall
Yeah.
in a top ranked university like a UCLA or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a 400 students, and double that, 400 student lecture hall with students who are not at a tier one school. Most of my students, I would say probably 2/3 of my students over the years have been first generation college students. They have nobody's taught them how you go to class.
Yeah.
And nobody's taught them how you pay attention. And the other thing that I think is fascinating, and I hope we can talk about this a bit, is the fact that students believe that they can multitask in class in both in front of the YouTube version of the class and in the live version. And they swear that they can both, in the live version or even in the YouTube version, they swear they can both listen to me, get the information, and do something else. And the answer is no, you can't.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are, but you can't multitask if both tasks are cognitive. If one is automatic, and if you're chewing a sandwich, you can certainly pay attention to me. If you're drinking a cup of coffee, you can pay attention to me. But you can't pay attention to me if you're looking at a text message and trying to respond and trying to listen to the lecture. I mean, actually, we did a study years ago where we had students sitting in a classroom and watching a lecture. And the lecture was, I think it was a 30-minute lecture, as I remember, and they were going to be tested on it when the lecture was done. Beforehand, we'd gotten information about every single person's cell phone number in the class, their carrier, et cetera. And we set up the test at the end to be based on information that happened at very specific times in the 30 minutes. Those times, interesting enough, were the times that we decided to text the people. So we would text everybody in the class when something important was on the screen. The requirement was, if you get a text, take a look at it and respond. And what happened is that some got no text during the class, some got 3 texts, I think, stretching my brain back a lot of years, and some got 5 texts maybe during the class. The ones that got 5 texts did poorly, terribly, thinking they could multitask and thinking that they could hold it together. I know it was 0, 1, and 5, I think, or something. Anyway, it doesn't matter because the ones who got the more texts did poorer. The interesting thing is that there were some people who, since we took their phones afterwards and wrote down when they got the text, when they responded, we had all those data, there were some people who did not respond immediately. They waited for sometimes up to 3-4 minutes to respond to our text. And when we texted them and asked them, why did you do this? They said, oh, because we were waiting for something on the screen that we knew wouldn't be on the test. That's something called metacognition. And I think that's really critical when you talk about online lectures, online classes, is understanding how your brain works. Metacognition is really understanding how your brain works, how you learn, how you best learn. And what we know from a lot of our research, our more recent research, is that metacognition plays a very important role in mediating the effects between, say, boredom and performance in a classroom. Yes, if you're bored, you probably do worse in class. But if you're bored and you have poor metacognition, you do worse, much worse in class. So it's the ones in class that don't have a very good sense of how to be in a class, basically, and how to pay attention. And one time I brought a guest speaker who came in and he showed a documentary, and then we were talking about the documentary. And while he was showing it on the screen, I went and sat next to him. Next to me on the other side was a young man, probably in his late teens, early 20s, I would guess. And the entire time he was on his phone. He was texting the entire time. Now he was sitting next to me. So obviously there was no feeling of, oh, I'm doing something wrong. I think his feeling was, I can get as much information as I want. Poof, it just magically comes in, even though I may not be paying attention. And you can't.
But isn't it funny? And I don't know if you think, is this a generational thing? But because if I think I'm going to a class, for me, it's a free space. It's the opportunity to learn something. But the next generation, I guess, feels more like it's a stressor for them to go to class because they're missing so many other things. So as you're talking about, again, the distractions, right? So how do we balance this? Sort of this is the mental balance. I know in your books, and I'll ask you in a little bit about your tech breaks, because you've wonderfully described sort of making an agreement with students, maybe when they come to class, or agreement in meetings. Can I have you tell my class about these tech breaks? I mean, how do we stop, short of telling the students, stop, you need to put your phones outside, you can't do this while you're in class, which we probably can't get away with. How do we now secure the attention for these students who seem to think this is quite okay? They can multitask while they're in class.
Right. And part of all of this falls under the rubric of attention. And in what way can we help someone pay attention? And when you look at the flip side, when they're not paying attention, what are they doing? Well, in general, when they're not paying attention, they're dealing with their technology gadgets, their phones, their tablets, whatever. So we developed a tech break such that what you do is you actually literally have them set their phone for 1 minute and tell them they have 1 minute to look at everything on the screens in front of them, whatever they want, answer text messages, check their email, whatever. When the alarm dings for 1 minute, they're to shut down anything they don't need for their homework or for the project they're working on. And I don't mean minimizing it on a screen or leaving it in the background on your phone. I mean, flick it off on your phone, close it on your screen, because otherwise those little numbers taunt you down at the bottom. Those little icons at the bottom of the screen taunt you. And then set their phone for 15 minutes, turn the sound off, turn it upside down, and put it right in front of them, so they can see it right in their field of view. Now, what that does is turning it upside down takes away the visual signal that says you got a text message or you got a notification of some sort, and the phone right close to you in your view tells your brain, don't worry, you will get to look at anything you want in 15 minutes or less. And so when the alarm for 15 minutes goes off, you tell them to set it for 1 minute again, and 1 minute to look at anything they want. It's amazing how many text messages they can respond to in 1 minute. They're pretty quick. And then again, 1 minute, 15 minutes, 1 minute, 15 minutes, until the 15-minute ding goes off. And they say to themselves, wait, I just want to finish this one chapter, this one section, this one sentence, this one problem, whatever. Then start encouraging them to change it to 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes. I always felt like the end result should be something on the order of a 2-minute tech break, a 30-minute focus time, and a 2-minute tech break. I thought that should be enough. And it doesn't really matter. The funny thing is that I've had people say, oh yeah, I give them a 5-minute tech break. It doesn't matter. The idea is you're training yourself to focus and not grab that device and self-interrupt. When people have looked at interruptions, half of interruptions come from the outside, particularly notifications on your phone are a big interruption, but half of them come from inside your head. And your brain is saying, hey, I better check TikTok, or I better do this, or I better do that. And so it pushes you away from the task you're doing to a different task.
Dr. Rossen, I think you're being very generous, because I'm thinking, but are we doing injustice to the teachers now, the instructors? Because if you have gold to impart in 50 minutes, right? Or as an employer, right? If we see our employees grab phones all the time, we have a very strict policy on that. And I'm sure we're causing stress in the process. But I guess the idea is if we train them, if we can train them for 30 minutes, we can train them for a whole lecture, or make sure again, wouldn't it be nice if they could just put the phone away? Can we not just demand that as a school?
It doesn't work, because and there's tons of research on this, if you ask them to put the phone away, what happens is you now start getting into that, what's going on inside their brain. And what's going on inside their brain is they're thinking about what they should be interrupted about. They're thinking about,
Yeah.
oh, I should check my text messages. Oh, I got a notification to do such and such. Oh, I better check my calendar, make sure. It doesn't matter what it is, but their brain drives them. It
Yeah.
says, I've got to do this. So it distracts them from the task at hand.
Yeah.
And if the task at hand is education, they're not going to be paying much attention. I always tell people, go on CNN some night and try to pay attention to either the scroll at the bottom or the audio, and you can't do both at once.
No, so true.
You can't. It's impossible. I mean, yes, there is some evidence that about 2% of the population are super taskers who can do that.
Yeah.
But I've never met anybody that can, and I certainly know that that I can't. My wife can't. Everybody I know can't. Even my young grandchildren, who range from newborn to 10 years old, almost 11, can't do it. I mean, they just can't.
No, I absolutely hear you, and I think it's super stressful because you're almost getting all anxious about all the stuff you're missing while you're trying to listen and you're reading at the same time with a scroll. No,
your brain just, I mean, in terms of brain chemistry, your brain just doesn't work that way.
Right.
I mean, on a kind of funny level, on a very basic level, if you can imagine that your brain is sort of this mechanism that has a lot of neurons in there. And the way the neurons get activated is that the blood flow goes to where the neurons are, carries glucose, carries oxygen, parks that to the neurons. The neurons then use that to connect to other neurons. But if you imagine what happens when you get interrupted, well, the blood flow has to move. It's finite, so it has to move somewhere else. So if it was over here when you were thinking about Anderson Cooper talking, and now you're looking at your phone and it's over here, what happens with this material over here is it doesn't get processed. And going back, way back in psychology, the deeper levels of processing, the better chance you have of remembering it. If you're not processing something very deeply, you're not going to remember it.
Yeah.
That's why you can hear something on TV, but you're not paying attention, so you just don't remember it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But so looking at this in the context again of this online setting and everything going on and sort of the blingy world of entertainment and gamification and all these things happening at once. I mean, how do we as educators, how do we compete with this? I mean, before you would walk around on stage, you know, you would give of yourself, you would share your lecture, people would be following you and you would interact with questions. Now there's so much going on and so much expected of our instructors in tech delivery and make it interesting. And how do we deal with this? This is not an unrealistic expectation of the instructors to have to make this, put on this show now to keep people right here.
Well, so I will grant you that it's cost effective, very cost effective. I mean, quite honestly, I could use my lectures over and over and over again. I don't have to be there physically.
Yeah.
It's very cost effective. The problem is that the model doesn't work well, I don't think. I much rather, if I'm going to teach an online course, I'd much rather turn it into a blended course where you meet once a week or once every 2 weeks, and then the rest of the stuff is online, because then at least you're getting a chance to see the people. I also think that the part of the problem with the online education is that the good part is you can watch it anywhere, anytime. The bad part is you can watch it anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, true.
And you don't get that feeling of being in the moment with the teacher, whether it's a 400 student class or a 10 student class. There's this feeling of being in a classroom that puts you in the moment. It's almost like a Buddhist thing. It's just like you're present in that classroom and you feel like you're getting what's going on in that classroom. If you don't put yourself in that environment, then you feel a little missing. And if we now go back and talk about the fact that we've been talking about college education, basically. Now, what about kids during the pandemic? Of all ages, had to be online. All ages.
Very difficult.
And so they missed a lot, and the research is coming out saying that they fell behind in subjects like math and reading and pretty much every subject that the typical student fell behind anywhere from part of a year to almost a whole year.
Yeah.
And that's, again, because of the lack of personal connection, I think.
You're absolutely making a very good point. And I think some of the instructors, some of the teachers in our class, especially said for the younger generations, they felt that they had to reteach them how to behave. Now, I think it was a different situation, of course, maybe a little bit for college students, because some things were online. High schoolers, not so much. The teachers had to pivot, and a lot was lost in the social sphere. And that, in my mind, brings up another good point. Or I don't want to ask you what your thoughts are about this, because when you do have people, you have your students now online. I love your thought of a blended thing where you still have the chance to interact or feel the teacher or hear the teacher, and also you have some peer interaction. How do we make sure people are online? Half the time these days, you're in a class, people have at least checked out. You know, you sit in a gallery view, most people aren't on camera. You don't know if they're really there. Are they there? They're not. You know, how do we, people might be isolating themselves, or they might be in a home situation where they can't show themselves. But isn't that another thing? You know, you're not online. Aren't you even sort of pulling yourself further back and isolating yourself further in an online class?
It goes back to a concept of attention. How do you know the person is attending?
Yeah.
And the key to knowledge, to understanding and memorizing or remembering knowledge, has to do with attention. If you don't attend, if your prefrontal cortex isn't focusing on it, it's not going to be processed down through your hippocampus and wherever in your brain it's stored. And so there have been tricks applied to find out if people are paying attention. I mean, you can do pop-up. I've seen teachers do pop-up questions, and every student has to answer it within X amount of time. That's fine, but just because they're physically there doesn't mean they're mentally there. And I would argue that it's the mental part that's really the problem, because the physical part, I mean, they can park themselves in front of their iPad or in front of their laptop or whatever they have. But we don't know where their brain is parked.
Very well put, because you are right. These days, we're using Canvas at Cal State, Long Beach, right? And we have play pauses, we have all these great things. So if you change the browser, you move away a little bit, you have it pop up and stop the movie and go, are you still there? but you're right. It speaks for my physicality, but not necessarily to what I'm thinking about. So you're absolutely right about that.
Well, and again, 50% of the time there are distractions that come from inside their brain. So physically they might be there, but mentally it might be somewhere else. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true.
Now, that doesn't mean that they're not that way in the classroom, by the way.
That's true too.
It's the same in the classroom, but in the classroom, the teacher can note that and change a style. I mean, I used to, when I would have students who would be clearly not paying attention, and it was a smaller class, I would literally walk up to them and say, would you mind telling me what that last slide showed? And they would look and go, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention. And every once in a while I get somebody to say, yeah, I was watching it on my phone while you were talking. And I go, oh, okay, that's very smart, thank you, that's very smart. But most of the time the screen was there, but the brain wasn't. And if your brain is not focused on something, you are not going to process it. You are not going to learn it. And it doesn't, quite honestly, it doesn't even matter whether it's education. It's everywhere. It's in meetings, in business. I mean, in a business meeting, people are always on their phones. They're not processing what's going on as the concept of the meeting. And there must have been some concept in the meeting that was supposed to be transmitted from one person to another. But it's not. That's not happening if they put their phone in their lap and they're checking it out during the meeting.
So,
by the way, can I go back to something you asked earlier?
Please do. Yes, please do.
So you talked about taking away phones, and particularly during classroom. Dr. Nancy Cheever did an amazing experiment where she brought students into the lab or into a classroom actually, and she had them do nothing, just sit there and do nothing. And then she tested their anxiety levels, 10 minutes in, 30 minutes in, 50 minutes in. And what was interesting is she was able to split people up into sort of low users of tech. They could take it or leave it. Moderate users or very heavy users.
Yeah.
The low users of tech showed no anxiety change over the entire 50 minutes, flat, no change whatsoever, no anxiety. The moderate users started at no anxiety, got a little bit anxious by the 30-minute mark, but then kind of leveled off. The heavy users were already at 10 minutes statistically more anxious, and they kept getting more and more and more anxious. Those are our college students. Our college students are heavy users of smartphones, and they're the ones who, if you just make them sit there, are going to get anxious. And we know that anxiety inhibits learning.
That's a very good point. So you're saying actually where we think we would be doing them a favor by taking the technology away, we would actually do the exact opposite. We would create anxiety, taking away the ability to really focus on what's going on in class. So kind of back to your tech breaks and giving people sort of a mediated approach to having both worlds at the same time. So that's a really good point. I do want to ask you, before I want to ask you to ponder at the end. So what do we do as best in class, or trying to be best in class online educators? But I do want to ask you, because of course, recently the big rave in the classroom or for kids or students, adults, anybody really, is the whole conversation about ChatGPT and tools. Because some tools are good, it helps us create, or it helps us manage time, or it helps us do things better. Now, ChatGPT, you've got two camps on that, Dr. Rossen, right? You've got the people that say, oh, now it's another thing teachers have to worry about. We had Turnitin, now we have to think about, is the high level materials that is actually original work, or is it just copied, or is it good? No, because it helps to create. Are we taking away the kids' creativity journey or opportunity to sort of the fight or the journey of learning or pushing yourself by having this tool out there? Do you have any thoughts on what's all happening, that whole dialogue right now on ChatGPT, and whether we should ban it or the genie's out of the bottle?
I think AI has its purpose, and we have lived with AI, even though we don't know it, because AI has been in everything that we do. It just go for a Google search. AI will tell you what your best option is. You start typing 2 letters in. It'll tell you, it'll remember what you've searched for before.
True.
It'll interpret it. It'll try to figure out. I mean, that's AI in action. So we have had AI before. It's been here with us. And we've had Turnitin before, where students are checked with plagiarism. Yeah. The interesting thing is, if you plagiarize something, typically you're plagiarizing, if they're smart enough to plagiarize, they're plagiarizing journal articles, they're plagiarizing chapters from books or material from books, material that's been peer reviewed, material that's been known to be accurate.
Yep.
Chat stuff, the AI chat stuff is funny in the sense that it, unleashed on its own, so far what it tends to do is it tends to make things up, and it tends to say things that aren't true. And even, I was reading yesterday, even it'll give you a reference that's not accurate because it's making it up. So you don't really know. AI is interesting. It's programmed to do something and to learn, and it's a neural network in general. And it's programmed to learn by thousands and millions of examples of something, and it picks up trends, but it's nowhere near 100% accurate. It's nowhere near 80% accurate or 50% accurate. It depends on the field and the area. I think when you allow students to use that and let them feel like they can get away with it, you're doing them a disservice. If I were still teaching, what I would do, excuse me, what I would do is have them do a chat with one of the AI bots that you could get,
Mm-hmm.
and then verify the information,
Okay.
and then try to look through the information and see what is true and what is not. And I think that what we need to be doing is going, yeah, we live in an AI world. We already know that. This is just another sort of branch of AI. It'll turn into something else, I'm sure.
So I think being a good digital citizen, or again, teaching your students the difference between the tools, so that we just not blindly adopting, thinking that's okay. No, and I agree with you. I think you still have to source it. You still have to look at it and verify it and see where things are coming from. But it certainly is unnerving. I think Italy just banned it, but that was more for that was more sort of the information. I think that there were some data breach concerns, but now it's coming out that different schools actually have seen submissions of ChatGPT information that has been graded very highly. And of course, that's now you're a little concerned because how much of that was actually modified and properly checked and looked at. But I'm sure, as you said, we'll see a lot more of it.
It's the newest form of plagiarism, quite honestly. And
yes,
the interesting thing is it's not checkable.
I talked to a gentleman from one of the school districts asking him about it, and he said, well, his perspective was that he said, well, if I write a memo, or if I write something, I have my peers check it, or I send it to my admin assistant, or I sent it to my group and said, would you go through it? So he says, maybe these days it's very hard to find original work. So if it can save me time, and I can use it as a starting point, or the students can use it as a starting point, maybe that's helpful. So
but the students don't do that. But we're imputing students for having good behavior, and they don't necessarily. Their goal is, if they get an assignment, if there's something that can cut their time, they're going to go ahead and do that. It's not they're not doing it for altruistic reasons.
No, true. Very, very true. Very true.
And part of it is they're opting to take a shortcut, which is fine. I mean, this is. I've had students cheat all through all the 40 some odd years that I taught. Students cheat. I've seen every different kind of cheating. This is a new one, and it's what's the word? It's checkable.
Yeah.
See, the thing is that oftentimes when I used to teach senior seminars, which is our kind of the penultimate, or the sort of last class you take as a psychology major. Okay. And have students do projects, proposed projects. If they use any sort of AI to do that, they would have to explain it, where they got it and why it's true. Yeah. That's very difficult if you don't know the material. And it's not like, see, what I always had them do is turn in a first draft, turn in your very first draft. If you're using a chat bot to do it, your first draft is going to look like your last draft, because you're not going to be doing anything. And that's not the way the world works when you're writing. True. The first draft goes into the second draft, which goes into the third draft, which goes into your final submitted paper. Yeah. I would have students literally submit drafts along the way. Not that I was going to grade them, just so I could check them to see. And it wasn't, this was pre AI chat stuff, but they were still getting stuff online and putting it in, clipping it in. And that's really no different than asking a chatbot to do it for you.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. But I guess as a student, right, it's hard to you want to strategize, because also there's a lot of expectation, there's a lot of materials, and it's tempting to use tools that will help you. I wouldn't say shorten the journey, but at least that will help you spend less time, but for optimal learning. But I guess it's going to be a very fine balance to see if. It could be very difficult to make real choices.
And I could also see, if you're, say, a psych major and you're taking a course in astronomy, which is going to have nothing to do with anything in your college career, your professional career, I can see that maybe in that case, using some sort of shortcut, even though it's probably not allowed, using a shortcut, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's taking away from your studies in psychology, which is where you should be investing your brain power. However, that's not what college is about. No, college is not about. If it were true, then you'd be a psychology major. You'd only take psychology classes, never take anything else in the world. It's about interactions. It's about being in a space where that's different. People handle things differently.
True.
And it's about learning how to be in the world, in the real world, while you're being kind of in this cloistered world and allowed to mess up, where in the real world you might not be allowed to mess up.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Dr. Rossen, I'm so grateful that you've given of yourself and your time today. I want to give you one more question that I hope you'll ponder with me, and that is, so what are we to do? I teach online also in my day job, and I teach it down at the university. We also do online classes, and there we're lucky. We have a tech delivery department. Not all schools are so lucky, but what do we have to, as this is inevitable, we're doing a lot more online teaching these days. What do we have to consider for optimal learning outcomes for our students, whether they be employees or students in college, students in high school? How do we deliver this best in class online models or teaching?
My honest answer is we don't. My honest answer is that from the data, I do understand how this saves money, how this is cost effective, how this is time effective. But it's not what college was supposed to be. I've been reading some articles from pretty learned people talking about, why do we even go to college? What's the point? Why do people go to college? Why don't they just go straight into the job market? Get a job. They have 4 or 5, 6 years of making extra money that they're not spending for college. What do they get out of college? And in my mind, what they get out of college is learning how to learn, and which is fine, but also learning how to be in an environment where learning and knowledge is important. Which is the classroom. I mean, that's the definition of the classroom. And if that's going to be the way, if we're going to just sort of decide to offload our education to TED Talks and to online education programs, we're really doing college a disservice, and we should label it as something else. It really is more of a technical education than how much can you remember to spit out on the test, not how much did you understand and what kind of questions do you have and what can you learn about the material from other people's perspectives. When I started in Dominguez Hills in the 1970s, the campus was 40% white students and 40% Black students. It was an interesting environment for me. When I stopped teaching, it was 65% Hispanic students. And of those Hispanic students, almost a huge proportion, more than half, were first generation college students, meaning the first in their family to go to college.
Amazing.
How do you learn what college is about? I mean, that's the whole point. You have to learn what college is about. If you're going to go to college and hold up your family's honor and your own goals, how can you do this if you sit at home and stare at a screen, or not stare at a screen?
It's a good point. But what do the educators do? Because these days we talk about a global job market, a global talent pool, and I need to, as an employer, be able to pull in people from around the world, and they could be remotely working, right? And certainly there were during COVID, but how do I now make sure I have an embracive, inclusive environment that again appears live, or is there a different word, or is it the same considerations for the employers that are now trying to migrate more and more, not from sitting next to me showing you how the job is done, but this online academy, if you will, of skill dispersion?
I think it's exactly the same. It's interesting. My son manages people who work for Johnson & Johnson and do support for products all over the world.
Okay.
And when he hires somebody new, he either makes them come to him or he goes to them,
Nice.
gets to know them, gets to know their personality, so that when he's then online with them, dealing with them, he has a backlog in his brain of who they really are.
Yeah.
I think too often we park our education in somebody's phone, basically,
Yeah.
and we go, okay, that's good. We've given them education. We haven't given them education. We've given them the opportunity to take advantage of some of this. But what if we give them an opportunity? They may as well just go and watch a movie and
Yep.
watch a video,
Yep.
and they're not going to get anything.
Right.
It's just not. It's not the same.
No.
I mean, I hate to be an old fogey, and it sounds like this old man is like just.
No.
But there's so much research on this.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic it has been sad for many people, but also a golden opportunity for us to see what a purely online education does.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
Yeah.
From young grades on up, it doesn't work.
No.
There are, like I said before, there are options.
Yeah.
And I would, if I had to teach part of my class online, I would certainly opt for making my students come see me.
Yeah.
When I taught online classes, I had office hours. I taught online classes for my last 5 years.
Yeah.
And I had maybe 2 people come into my office during office hours during that time.
That's
maybe
amazing.
2. And I'm not sure I can remember the second one. I
Yeah.
can remember the first one.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. No, it's there's a lot to think about, and certainly I think again I have to plug again one of my favorite books, Your Eye Disorder, which again also talks about all the disorders and challenges that come about with again the technology being so embedded in what we do, and whether you call it the chicken or the egg. If the disorders are already there, or we make them worse by ways of the technology, or it just exacerbates the challenges that we have. But there's a lot to think about as we teach online. So, Dr. Rossen, I want to thank you so much for taking time for me today, and I can't wait to upload this in our class setting and to share this with my great colleagues and my peers in class, because there's a lot to think about. So I will stop the recording now. Any last words?
Pass on any questions that they have. I'd be interested.
I will definitely.
It's too bad your class is not in an online state where I could go and talk to them and answer questions.
That's fantastic. And be careful what you say here, because I might just ask if there's an opportunity for us to do that, because this would be fantastic. We actually migrated this program this is the first semester it's fully online. Last year it was a sort of a hybrid or high flex setting coming out of the pandemic area. So I feel extremely lucky. I was part of the last cohort that actually got to spend some of the time in class. So as you point out, I value the fact of being able to actually have those interactions with people. But it's been interesting, and we know more will come of this. So I will stop and say thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, Dr. Rossen, for your tremendous insights.
Thanks for having me.